The soft clinking of champagne glasses died in an instant. 100 pairs of eyes, once glazed with polite party chatter, were now fixed on the projection screen behind my father. My own eyes were glued to it, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. On the screen, in stark black and white, were emails. My emails. Or at least they looked like mine. Words I'd never written, sentences I'd never conceived, were laid bare for everyone to see. They painted a picture of a son who was deceitful, a thief. They spoke of siphoning funds from my father's company, my family's legacy, to fund a reckless venture with a manipulative girlfriend. My girlfriend Lena stood beside me, her hand gripping my arm so tightly I could feel her trembling. Or maybe it was me. Her face, usually a canvas of vibrant life and color, was ashen. "As you can see," my stepmother Clara said, her voice dripping with a syrupy, feigned sorrow that turned my stomach to ice. She held a small remote, the instrument of my execution. "I didn't want to believe it. I told your father you were just misguided. But this..." She clicked the remote and a news slide appeared. Financial statements, twisted and doctored to look like I'd been embezzling for months. "This is a betrayal of the deepest kind." I looked to my father. His face was a thundercloud of crimson. His jaw was clenched, a vein pulsing in his temple. He wasn't looking at the screen anymore, he was looking at me. And in his eyes I saw not a flicker of doubt, not a glimmer of the man who had taught me to ride a bike and checked for monsters under my bed. I saw only the reflection of Clara's lies. "Dad," I started, my voice a dry crackle. "That's not true. None of it is." "Don't," he snarled, the word cutting through the silence like a whip. He took a step forward, his finger jabbing the air in my direction. "Don't you dare lie to my face, not after this. Not in this house, a house your mother and I built on honesty and hard work." "Clara is twisting everything," I pleaded, turning to the crowd of frozen faces. Our family friends, business partners, people who had known me my entire life. They stared back, their expressions a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. "She's trying to protect your father," Clara said softly, stepping beside him, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "From you, and from her." She flicked her eyes towards Lena, a look of pure venom flashing for just a second. That was it. The final, perfect move in her chess game. She had not only destroyed me, but she had also branded the love of my life as my co-conspirator. My father's chest heaved. "Get out," he said, his voice low and dangerous. I stood frozen. "What?" "Get outside." "Of my house," he roared, his voice finally breaking with rage and a pain so deep it was almost visible. "You are no longer my son." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Time seemed to warp, the sounds of the room fading into a distant hum. My son. He had said it. The finality of it was absolute. I saw Lena flinch as if she'd been struck. In that moment, surrounded by the ruins of my life, the smell of expensive perfume and betrayal thick in the air, I felt a strange, cold clarity. This was the end of one story. But it was also, though I couldn't possibly know it then, the violent, brutal beginning of another. But how did we get here? How did a woman who smelled of lavender and lies manage to poison the one person I thought would always believe in me? To understand the depth of her deception, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to a time when our house was just a home, not a battlefield. Before Clara, there was just me and Dad. My mother passed away from cancer when I was 12. Her absence left a crater in our lives so vast that for years we just skirted the edges, afraid to fall in. Dad threw himself into his work, a successful traditional manufacturing company he'd inherited from his father. It built high-grade machine parts, a business of steel, oil, and handshakes. I threw myself into the quiet, logical world of computers. Code was predictable. It followed rules. It didn't get sick and leave you. I remember one specific Saturday, years before, when my mom was still alive. She'd found me in my room, trying to make a little pixelated character walk across the screen. My dad had poked his head in, smiled, and said, "I don't get what you're doing, but your mother says you're building a world in there." She had kissed the top of my head. "He's an architect," she'd said. That memory, that one word, became my sanctuary. Our grief was a silent, shared language. We didn't talk about Mom much, but her presence was everywhere. In the wilting rose bushes she'd planted, in the way Dad would sometimes pause by her photo on the mantelpiece. We were a quiet, two-man team, navigating life as best we could. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Then came Clara. She was a consultant hired to help Dad's company streamline its HR department. At first, I was happy for him. She made him laugh again, a sound I hadn't realized I'd missed so much. She was beautiful, poised, and radiated a warmth that seemed to fill the empty spaces in our home. She'd bring him lunch at the office, listen intently as he talked about factory logistics, and would always ask me about my day, even if my answers were mumbled, teenage monosyllables. For my dad, who had been lonely for so long, she was a miracle. For me, a quiet observer, something felt off. It was nothing I could put my finger on. It was in the small things. The way her smile never quite reached her eyes when she looked at me. The way a photo of my mom was moved from the main living room to a less frequented hallway. When I asked, Clara said she'd dusted and just put it back in a safer place. Dad, besotted, just squeezed her hand and said how thoughtful she was. They married a year later. Clara and her son Josh moved in. Josh was 2 years older than me, already in college, studying business. He was everything I wasn't. Loud, charming, athletic. He was the kind of son my father's business friends could understand. He talked about profit margins and supply chains while I talked about Python scripts and user interfaces. He'd clap me on the back a little too hard and call my coding playing on the computer. Clara began her campaign slowly, subtly. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. She never criticized me directly to my father. Instead, she'd use backhanded compliments. "Alex is so brilliant with those computer games of his," she'd say at dinner. "So creative. It's a shame he doesn't apply that big brain to the real world, like the family business." She positioned Josh as the heir apparent. He'd spend summers interning at the factory, though mostly he just shadowed my dad and went on long lunches. I, meanwhile, was pushed further to the periphery, the sensitive artist of the family, lost in a digital world no one understood or valued. Dad, blinded by love and grateful to have a seemingly full family again, ate it all up. He saw Clara's concern as genuine. He saw Josh's ambition as a sign of a worthy successor. He saw my passion for technology as a childish hobby I would eventually outgrow. The real shift, the event that set the whole tragic future in motion, happened my sophomore year of college. It was the day I met Lena. I was in a campus coffee shop, debugging a piece of code that was making me want to throw my laptop through the window. She was at the next table, sketching furiously in a worn notebook, a smudge of charcoal on her cheek. She was arguing with someone on the phone about exhibition fees for a student art show. "But that's half of what I'd even make from a sale," she was saying, her voice a mix of frustration and passion. "It's impossible for new artists to get a foot in the door." After she hung up with a sigh, she caught me looking. I quickly looked back at my screen, embarrassed. A moment later, a shadow fell over my table. "Sorry about that," she said, her voice softer now. "You just witnessed the classic artist versus the world dilemma." I mumbled something about it being no problem. She pointed at my screen. "What's your dilemma?" "It's a recursive loop. It's not terminating properly." She tilted her head. "So it's stuck. I get that." And just like that, we were talking. She told me about her art, about the struggle to be seen, about how the galleries and online platforms that were supposed to help artists often felt like they were just exploiting them. I told her about my code, about the beauty of building something from nothing, of creating entire worlds out of pure logic. She didn't see it as a silly game. Her eyes lit up. She saw the creativity in it, the art. For the first time, I felt truly seen by someone outside of my own head. Lena was a force of nature. Where I was quiet and methodical, she was vibrant and expressive. She pulled me out of my shell. We spent hours in that coffee shop, and by the end of the day, I'd fixed my code and she'd filled a page with a sketch of me, hunched over my laptop, a look of intense concentration on my face. She'd titled it The Architect. When I saw the title, my breath caught in my throat. It was my mom's word, a word I hadn't heard in years. In that moment, I think I was already halfway in love with her. We fell in love quickly and deeply. It was a love built in late-night study sessions, shared pizzas, and long walks where we'd dream about the future. It was during one of those talks, as Lena lamented yet another rejection from a local gallery, that the idea was born. "The system is broken," she said, kicking a loose stone on the sidewalk. "They take huge commissions. They only show artists who are already established. It's a closed loop, the same recursive loop you were talking about." A light bulb went on in my head. "So what if we broke the loop?" I said, stopping. "What if we built a new system? A platform where artists control everything? They set their own prices, they build their own digital storefront, and they connect directly with buyers. No gatekeepers, no insane commissions." Lena stopped and stared at me, her eyes wide. "Like a bridge. A bridge between the artist and the person who loves their art." "Exactly," I said, my heart starting to race with the thrill of the idea. "We could call it that, Artisan's Bridge." In that moment, Artisan's Bridge became our shared dream. It wasn't just a business idea, it was the fusion of our two worlds. Her artistic vision and my technical skill. It was our baby. We spent every spare moment working on it. My dorm room became our headquarters. The walls were covered in her design mock-ups and my whiteboard scrawls of database architecture. We were building our future, line by line of code, stroke by stroke of a digital paintbrush. It was the purest, most exciting time of my life. I was so wrapped up in our project that I didn't see the storm gathering back home. I didn't realize that our private dream was about to become my stepmother's greatest weapon. Introducing Lena to my family was tense. Dad was polite but reserved. He was a man who understood balance sheets and steel tensile strength. The idea of his son dating a starving artist and building a website didn't compute. Clara, however, was a different story. She laid the sweetness on thick. "Lena, darling, it's such a pleasure. Your work must be fascinating. Art is such a wonderful hobby." The word hobby was a tiny, perfectly aimed dart. Lena, to her credit, just smiled graciously. But Clara saw our project for what it was, a declaration of my independence. It was a future I was building for myself, one where I wouldn't need the family business or my father's money. A future she couldn't control. And so she began to actively sabotage it. The first major blow came when our prototype was ready for a beta launch. We needed a few $1,000s for dedicated server hosting. I decided to approach my dad formally. I prepared a full business plan, market analysis, revenue projections, a functioning demo. I was proud of it. It was the most real-world thing I had ever done. I scheduled a meeting with him. The night before, Clara called me. "Alex, honey," she began, her voice slick with concern. "Your father is under a lot of stress. This new project of yours, he's worried. He thinks this girl, Lena, is distracting you from your real responsibilities. He thinks you're throwing your future away on a fantasy." "It's not a fantasy, Clara," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. "It's a legitimate business." "Of course, dear, but maybe this isn't the right time to ask him for money. It might look like you're just using him." The meeting was a disaster. Before I could even open my laptop, Dad put up a hand. "Alex, I've thought about this, and the answer is no." "You haven't even seen it," I said, stunned. "I don't need to. Clara told me about your conversation. Son, your focus should be on your studies, on getting an internship at the company. Not on this website. I won't fund it. It's final." I was devastated. But looking back, I see Clara's genius. She hadn't just convinced my father to say no. She had framed it as her protecting him from me. She was the dutiful wife managing his stress, while I was the reckless son with his hand out. That rejection should have been the end of Artisan's Bridge. But it wasn't. It was the fire that forged our resolve. Lena and I looked at each other, the disappointment heavy in the air, and we made a pact. We would do it ourselves. We bootstrapped. I took on freelance coding gigs, building boring websites for local businesses. Lena sold some of her own paintings online and took on graphic design work. We poured every dollar we made into server costs. We lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee. Our relationship, tested by the pressure, only grew stronger. We weren't just a couple anymore, we were partners in every sense of the word. 6 months later, we launched our beta. We had a dozen artists, friends of Lena's from art school. The first sale happened a week later. A woman in Ohio bought a small watercolor of a cityscape from an artist in California for $150. Our platform took a tiny 5% transaction fee. $7.50. Lena and I stared at the notification on my screen, and we started laughing. Then the laughter turned to tears. We had done it. We had made a real transaction. We had built a bridge. That $7.50 was the most satisfying money I had ever earned. It was proof. Proof that our idea worked. Proof that we didn't need my father's approval or his money. But that small success was like a flare in the dark, and it caught Clara's eye. She must have realized that her passive-aggressive tactics weren't enough. My independence was a direct threat to her plans for Josh to inherit the entire family fortune. If I had my own success, I would remain a factor in my father's life, a potential claimant to his legacy. She needed to remove me from the equation entirely. That's when her quiet manipulations turned into a full-blown conspiracy. One weekend I was home, she came to me in a panic, claiming her laptop had a virus and she couldn't access important files for my dad's company. "You're so good with these things, Alex," she'd cooed. "Could you just take a look?" Reluctantly, I did. I found the corrupted files, which were password protected. When I asked for the password, she gave it to me. The files opened, revealing quarterly financial reports. I told her the files were fine and left. A week later, I overheard her telling my dad, with Josh as a corroborating witness, that she'd caught me trying to hack into the company's financials. "He must be in some kind of trouble," she'd whispered, her voice laced with poison. My dad just looked at me with a new suspicion in his eyes. She was meticulous. She collected evidence over months, twisting every innocent action into a piece of her sordid narrative. I was completely oblivious. I was busy coding, fixing bugs, and celebrating every new artist who signed up. Lena and I were in our own little bubble of creation and love. We were so focused on building our dream that we never saw the demolition crew arriving. The final act was the party for my father's 60th birthday. It was a lavish affair at the house. Clara insisted Lena and I be there. "It's about family, Alex," she'd said, and like a fool, I believed her. I thought maybe, just maybe, our small success had softened my dad's stance. We walked in, and the atmosphere was strange. People were polite but distant. Now I know why. Clara had spent the week before the party planting seeds of doubt, whispering her poisonous stories to close family and friends, priming them for the main event. She waited until after the toasts when my father was at his most sentimental and emotional. She dimmed the lights, her face a mask of tragic resolve, and she began her presentation, her masterwork of lies. And that brings us back to that moment. Standing in the wreckage, the words, "You are no longer my son," echoing in the silent room. Lena's hand was a small, warm anchor in the freezing chaos. She looked from my father's furious face to my shattered one, and without a word she squeezed my arm, a silent message. "You and me. We're a team." I took a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of Clara's victory. I looked at my father one last time, hoping to see a flicker of the man I knew, but he was gone, replaced by a stranger. Then I looked at Clara, and I saw the faintest, almost imperceptible smirk of triumph on her lips. I turned, and with Lena's hand still on my arm, I walked out of that house, out of that life, and into the terrifying, unknown future. The door clicked shut behind us, a sound of absolute finality. We stood on the manicured lawn, the sounds of the party already starting to murmur back to life inside. We had nothing but my old laptop, a few $100s in our bank account, and an idea. That night, huddled in our tiny, cramped apartment, the weight of it all came crashing down. I didn't just lose my father, I lost my entire history, my identity. Every happy memory of that house was now tainted. I felt a rage so profound it was suffocating, followed by a wave of grief that left me hollow. I sat on the floor staring at the wall, and for the first time I thought about giving up. What was the point? She had won. It was Lena who saved me. She knelt in front of me, taking my face in her hands. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but they were clear and fierce. "Listen to me," she said, her voice steady. "She took your past. Don't you dare let her take our future, too." This, she tapped my laptop, which sat on our rickety coffee table. "Artisan's Bridge is ours. She can't touch it. Let's make it so big, so successful that we build a world she can't even begin to imagine. That's how we win." Her words cut through my despair. She was right. A screaming match would accomplish nothing. Vengeance wasn't about tearing Clara down. It was about building ourselves up so high that she would become an insignificant speck below. That night, something inside me shifted. The grief and rage didn't disappear, but they were forged into something else. Fuel. Cold, hard, relentless determination. The next 2 years were a blur of grueling work. We were running on fumes and pure adrenaline. I coded for 18 hours a day, building out features, strengthening our security, optimizing the site. My grief for my lost family became a singular focus on my work. Every line of code was a brick in the wall I was building around my heart. Lena was the soul of the company. She was on the phone constantly, personally recruiting artists, creating marketing materials, handling customer service. She was our evangelist, her passion for art convincing creators to take a chance on our tiny, unknown platform. We celebrated every small victory with a ferocity born of desperation. Our first 100 artists, our first $10,000 in total sales, our first mention in a small tech blog. Each milestone was a validation, a tiny light in the darkness. There were times we almost broke. A server crashed and we lost a day's worth of data. A bigger competitor launched with millions in funding, offering a slicker platform. We nearly ran out of money twice. I remember one night staring at a final demand notice for our server bill, the red ink looking like blood. I told Lena maybe it was over. Maybe Clara was right, and it was just a fantasy. Lena took the notice, tore it in half, and said, "No. I'm going to go sell another painting tomorrow. You're going to fix that bug you've been fighting with. We don't stop." The next day, she sold a large canvas for enough to cover us for 3 more months. That was Lena. She never let me give up. The turning point came unexpectedly. A well-known reclusive painter, famous for his distrust of the gallery system, heard about us through one of Lena's artist networks. His name was John Sterling. We had a video call with him. He was a gruff, bearded man in a paint-splattered studio. He grilled us for an hour. "Why should I trust you 2 kids?" he'd barked. Lena didn't flinch. "Because we're not a corporation, Mr. Sterling. We're an artist and an architect. We built this because the system is broken, and you know it's broken better than anyone." He was silent for a long moment, then he grunted. "Send me the contract." He liked our story, our mission. He signed up and listed 3 exclusive pieces on Artisan's Bridge. The art world went insane. Major art publications wrote articles. Why legendary painter John Sterling chose a tech startup over Sotheby's. Our traffic exploded. The servers, which I had thankfully overprepared, groaned but held. In 48 hours, we had more signups than we'd had in the previous 2 years. And then the investors came calling. Not the ones we had begged for meetings with before, but the big ones, the Silicon Valley venture capitalists. Suddenly they understood. We weren't just a website, we were a disruption. We were the future of the art market. We were cautious. We'd been burned before. We vetted them carefully, and we chose a firm that understood our vision, our artist-first ethos. We walked into their sleek glass and steel office, 2 kids who had been living on ramen, and we walked out with $5 million in seed funding. I'll never forget the look on Lena's face as we stood on that street corner, the term sheet clutched in my hand. It was a look of disbelief, of joy, of vindication. We hadn't just survived, we were on our way. The next 5 years were a rocket ship. We hired a team. We moved into a real office, a beautiful loft space with exposed brick and tons of natural light. Lena's choice. She became our chief creative officer, her vision guiding the entire look and feel of the platform. I became the CEO, though I was still happiest when I was elbow deep in code with our engineering team. We hired our first employees, the first dozen people who believed in us. We saw our first billboard go up in San Francisco, and Lena and I just stood on the street corner looking up at it, speechless. Artisans Bridge grew beyond our wildest dreams. We expanded internationally. We launched new tools for artists, print-on-demand services, marketing analytics, a community forum that became a thriving hub of creativity. We became a unicorn, a private company valued at over $1 billion. My life was unrecognizable. I was flying to meetings in London, being featured in magazines. Lena and I bought a beautiful home, one we chose together, one filled with light and laughter and art. We got married in a small ceremony on a cliffside overlooking the ocean, surrounded by the true family we had built, our close friends and our earliest employees. Through all this success, I had zero contact with my old family. I built a wall around that part of my life. It was a closed chapter, a ghost that I refused to let haunt my new life. I heard whispers, though. An old family friend I ran into told me that my father's company was struggling. He hadn't adapted to the changing times. His business, built on old-world principles, was an analog relic in a digital age. The friend hinted that Josh's management had been disastrous, full of bad investments in flashy but hollow ventures and a general neglect of the core business. Then about a year ago, I received a certified letter at my office. It was from a law firm. My father's company, the one his grandfather had started, was on the verge of bankruptcy and was being put up for auction. I sat in my office, the letter in my hand, and stared out the window at the city. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to think about my father. I thought about the man he was before Clara, the man who smelled of sawdust and machine oil, who had a booming laugh and calloused hands. I felt a pang of sadness, not for the man who had thrown me out, but for the man he used to be. Lena came in and saw the look on my face. She read the letter, then sat on the edge of my desk, her expression soft. "What are you going to do?" she asked. The old me, the wounded boy, wanted to do nothing. He wanted to let it burn. He wanted Clara and Josh to face the consequences of their greed and incompetence. But I wasn't that boy anymore. Lena and I hadn't built our empire on vengeance. We had built it on creating things, on supporting people. "I'm going to buy it," I said. Lena didn't look surprised, she just nodded. "Okay." My company acquired my father's company for a fraction of its former worth. It was a simple, anonymous corporate transaction. I imagine Clara and Josh were just relieved that some faceless corporation had bailed them out. But I didn't let it die. I didn't strip it for parts. I invested. I brought in a new management team. We modernized the machinery, digitized the logistics, and integrated its manufacturing capabilities into our own supply chain for things like custom art frames and shipping materials. I preserved the name my grandfather had chosen. I saved the jobs of the dozens of employees who had worked there for decades, men and women who had known me as a child. A month after the acquisition was finalized, Clara showed up at my office. I hadn't seen her in nearly a decade. She looked older, the lines of bitterness etched around her mouth. Her designer clothes looked a little worn. She tried to push past my executive assistant, her voice a shrill echo of its old authority. "I need to see Alex. I'm his mother. His stepmother." My assistant, a wonderfully efficient woman named Maya, blocked her path. "Mr. Thompson is in a meeting. Do you have an appointment?" Clara's face fell. The power she once wielded was gone. She was just another person in a lobby. I watched from my office's internal security camera. I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction. Just a vast, empty distance. I told Maya to inform her that if she had business with the company, she could submit a proposal through the proper channels. She was escorted out. That was the last I ever saw of her. The final piece was my father. I didn't call him. I didn't confront him. I wrote him a letter. I told him that my company had acquired his and that its legacy was safe. I told him about my life, about Lena, about the world we had built. I didn't mention the party, the lies, or Clara. The letter was devoid of anger. It was just a statement of facts. At the end, I offered him an honorary, powerless position on the new board as a tribute to the man who had started it all, a way for him to save face. He never replied, but a few weeks later, I received a small package at my office. No return address. Inside was a single, old, silver-framed photograph. It was the one of my mother, the one Clara had moved to the hallway all those years ago. Tucked into the back of the frame was a folded, yellowed piece of paper. It was a stock certificate for one share in his original company, issued to me on the day I was born. Worthless financially. But it was the only apology he was capable of giving. A quiet admission sent from the ruins of the life he had chosen. It was a confession, a surrender, and a plea, all in one. I placed the photo on my desk next to a picture of Lena and me on our wedding day. My empire isn't the billion-dollar valuation or the fancy office. It's the life Lena and I built from the ashes. It's the community of artists we've empowered. It's the strength to save a piece of my past without letting it consume my future. Clara tried to destroy my love story, and in doing so, she handed me the motivation to build my own world. A world of love, integrity, and creation. A world where the architects, the dreamers, and the artists win. And that is the empire she and people like her will never, ever be able to touch.